You're listening to PatchBay on tymkrs.
Welcome to PatchBay, sort of a conversational podcast all about audio equipment, music, audio engineering, recording, music production, live sound, and all sorts of other stuff, including hockey sometimes.
On rare occasions.
That's what happens when you invite a
Hockey.
Canadian to co-host, I guess.
This is the problem. Talk about coffee, hot dogs, donuts, and hockey. That's
Yeah,
pretty much.
A couple
pretty much
episodes
the deal.
ago, there was links to the weather report for the month in the show notes. So, this show can get a little off topic at times.
The only thing I couldn't figure out was if it was in Fahrenheit or Celsius. Whatever the case was, it was damn cold.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm over my hockey stuff. Now that it's back, it's just like, breathing oxygen and stuff. So we're all good. Everybody's happy now. So it's everything's back to normal. So we don't need to talk about it all the time.
All right.
Anyway, so do you want to jump right into the little bit that you sent me this afternoon?
Yeah, well, let's sort of introduce the show first, I think. So the other week we tried to record this, and I completely forgot to arm one of the tracks, so we gave up after about 10 minutes in, so that we didn't have to redo it right then. But
we need a whoa soundtrack or something, or you know what I mean, like some kind of excellent sound effect right there.
Yeah. Well, these things happen in the studio. It's just
it happens.
You live, you learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not in this case, because I've done that same thing a couple times. But yeah, Shane was asking me about DIY projects for like building your own audio gear, be it a compressor, a preamp, whatever. And I happen to know of somebody who has a pretty neat DIY audio project that he's working on currently. And we'll let you guys listen to on a little clip we recorded earlier this week, and then we'll sort of discuss it. Hello, Alex. So I hear you have a DIY audio project, and we are going to be talking about all sorts of these kinds of projects, and we thought we would give an opportunity for you to just quickly explain the one that you're working on.
All right. So, working on a little project where I'm building a sort of a DIY audio interface, aiming for really low noise and such. And as a first step, I'm just creating an audio capture board, and I have that board made so far. Not fully tested yet, but yeah.
All right, and I know you've been focusing heavily on keeping the noise levels down. What have you done with your design to try to keep the noise floor as minimal as possible?
Well, a lot of that has to do with good part selection. You have to choose an ADC that has a good low noise floor. You have to pick op amps for the input buffer that also don't contribute much noise. And other things have to do with the PCB design itself. You need, in particular, it's using a balanced signal all the way through to the ADC. And by keeping the traces for that close together, you avoid interference.
Yeah, the less interference between the two lines on a balanced signal, the less you're having to sum out at the end, right?
Yeah. And the closer together the traces of the balanced signal are, the less chance there is of an interference signal being different between the two traces.
All right. And another thing that you were thinking about doing with this, which we talked about on zombietech.tv this week as well, is that you're thinking of doing a large array of microphones as inputs into this thing eventually, so that you can do virtual microphone placement in a room and motion tracking. Could you just quickly explain how that works?
Yeah. So the first prototype I have just has 4 input channels, but in a future version I'll have a larger number of input channels, and what you do is that you have an array of microphones, either just linear or a grid, or just any arbitrary pattern technically, though simple patterns are easier. And what you can do is you can look at the phase of the incoming signal and determine the location of something, and you can try and cancel out sounds from sources excepts coming from a location that you want, etc.
And how do you think that this kind of technology that you're working on might be useful in the recording studio?
It could be useful if you have something that you want to mic that is moving around and you don't want to have a cord going to it or something. It's also interesting from the point of view of you could cancel out some other possible unwanted sounds that might occur, such as, I don't know, some door getting slammed, whatever.
We tend to try to control that sort of thing in the
Yeah.
studio, but some of the things that are harder to control are things like the guitarist bleeding in through the microphones on the drum
Hmm.
kit, for example.
Yeah,
We
that sort of
normally
thing.
have to build separate isolation rooms to completely get those apart, but with this technology, could you sort of minimize that?
You could to some extent. You probably couldn't completely, though how well you can do it does depend on how many microphones you have. The more microphones you have in more optimal placement, the more effectively you can focus your down to a smaller area that you're getting your sound source from.
Okay, so for this stuff to work really, really well, we're talking about a room that's built to do it.
Ideally, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm sure that'll paint very cool images in a lot of people's minds out there. And yeah, if you guys want to hear more about this project, just let us know and we'll get Alex back on to answer some of your questions. Thank you, Alex, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. So the one thing that I can't remember, even though I listened to it 4 or 5 times, was what was that guy's name again?
Alex.
Alex. Okay. So he's drawing up plans, or probably has already started kind of coming up with parts right now for a new audio interface. Sound like 4 channel, which is kind of handy because most of these sort of the El Cheapo boxes you can buy are only usually 2 at the most. So it's nice to build something like that. But um, what I'm wondering about before we get into the whole miking thing that you guys discussed was just drivers and that kind of stuff. I mean, I know you guys can kind of figure out how to build the DIY part of the electronics part of it, but making the box work, um, that's going to be an interesting. I mean, obviously, it's going. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, approaching this kind of thing as a slightly normal human being, you're like, okay, even if I finish the electronics, writing driver software just sounds like impossible stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly. Like, and I mean, I kind of don't think he's planning on marketing it at this point. I
No, no,
sounds to
he's
me
not.
like he's just gonna do it for himself just to see if he can do it. But
Yeah.
Um, but if I was planning on marketing something like that, I would really sort of look into something like Reaper or, because that software is sort of community anyway. So, if you started building interfaces that worked well with some software that was, it would probably be good rather than, trying to get like hardware to work with one of the big boys. Just so much more difficult to we were having a discussion about trying to contact iTunes, and it's not, you can't really. So, trying to contact some of the other sort of audio DAW companies might be a little difficult. So I would say, yeah, if I was gonna do something like this, I would try to make sure it worked with, some software that you can get a hold of.
Yeah. So, in the driver side of things, you basically depends on which platform you're working on, but he's a Linux guy, and
Yeah.
all of the Linux audio drivers are open source, and how to hook into the ASIO um, sort of style that it uses is
Mhm.
a known thing, which he can do. So
Yeah.
it would work with all of the available Linux.
Which that would be good because there isn't really any kind of Linux audio boxes really out there. Like those guys just buy boxes and hack them basically. Which
Yep.
is there's a really big market for buying not the new fandangled box, but lots of guys are buying them and running Linux audio systems just for that sake, because they can get away with not having to have the brand new box, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
so
run
getting
Mac here because the audio latency in the drivers is, 1/10 of that, what it would be on Windows. But Linux is just as snappy as Mac when it comes to this kind of thing because they're based on similar technology. And the only reason I can't use my nice audio interfaces, my expensive audio interfaces that I have here on Linux is because there are no drivers for them.
Yeah, I was gonna mention too that provided there's ASIO drivers for your box, then yeah. Like, see, the thing is, you can get some functionality out of
It may be ALSA, Elsa. I don't know.
LADSP, LADSAP, or whatever. Yeah, there are those drivers as well. What I was gonna say though too, like, I mean, just speaking to Pro Tools, and I have a Digio O2 at work, and it works great with Pro Tools. Obviously, I'm not using the latest version of Pro Tools, but any other audio recording program, it it'll play back audio, but you can't really record to anything other than Pro Tools. So what is handy is being able to like listen to a mix in iTunes through the studio setup. But as far as actually recording something, it's pretty much Pro Tools or bust. And pardon me, live Ableton. But that's basically the gist of it, and that's just the way the drivers work for it.
Yeah.
It's
So on
probably
the
what they did on
software
purpose.
side of things, yeah, I mean, as long as you can take care of that interface between the operating system and the hardware, any of the DAWs will work for the most part, unless the people designing the drivers are doing something that's not standard. And if that's the case, then you need a little bit more of an extensive driver to
Mhm.
handle things. And that would be the case for a lot of the fancier stuff out there, which is of course what Shane and I are used to using.
Yeah.
So a lot of our interfaces are a lot more picky on what they'll talk to. But I'm sure that Red would probably be doing something. I don't know if he would even hook it to a computer. This is the sort of guy who could probably hook it up to like a FPGA and directly write all of
Right.
the 4-channel inputs into PCM files right directly into RAM, and
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
crazy smart guy.
Yeah. Well, that I mean, well, if you're doing it that way, then you really don't have to.
Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of guy who could design the board that lives inside of our interfaces and could design a dedicated, software mixing board that like loaded the samples up into it and then mixed them together. This is what he does.
The mix yourself box. I need one of those, as it were. So I was gonna sort of get on quickly to. I wanted to sort of circle back and talk about the actual components that he was putting in,
Sure.
and then I wanted to talk about the microphone techniques that he was sort of discussing. Um, so as far as the components are concerned, it sounds like he's doing the whole thing extremely balanced, which is quite smart. The one thing I was going to mention that he may want to look into, depending on what he plans to hook up to it, but there's SPDIF, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's also AES EBU, which is the sort of SPDIF version that was done by the Audio Engineering Society, but it's all XLR based.
Yeah, it's the
Um,
same exact thing. It's just SPDIF is the commercial, consumer grade stuff, and the one that Shane just talked about is the professional grade that we would use in the studio for usually for digital audio setups.
Yeah. The one thing I was going to mention, though, I believe AES-CBU actually transfers more than just two channels, Whereas
You
Spadif
can
is,
do more on it, but
yeah,
when it's in stereo mode, it's essentially the same thing.
it's basically the same idea. I was just going to mention that might be, if he's going to go high end on this thing, that might be an interesting option to put into just for the sake of having it. I mean, there's so many, um, consoles and stuff like that that you could basically do, use a console as a basically digital preamp,
Yeah.
4 channels or whatever you want going into this DAC's building.
By the
And
way, that format, that digital format that you're talking about, is what we'll be switching over here to in the studio shortly.
Sexy.
Because our live video switcher that we're getting, that's its input. So to get that into the live video switcher, which does a live H.264 video encoding stream, I need to give it the audio. I'm going to be using the SPDIF output on the audio interface.
Nice.
And because it's the same format, I can basically go from
Spadif
the RCA coaxial SPDIF output on the back of my tone port UX8, or maybe that one doesn't have one, but I know my Firefly 808 does. Out of that output, so that's basically just my monitoring sound card, right? This 8-channel audio interface, and it's going to be throwing out of its SPDIF coaxial RCA through just a cable, not a converter, to a what do you call it? BNC style AES EBU connector, and evidently the ATEM television studio live video switcher will be able to recognize that and use it as the audio stream for the live encoding.
Speaking to that, I'm not entirely sure if AES EBU and SPDIF are exactly the same clock.
No,
like,
but as long as you
set, but I don't know if I don't think it's exactly the same.
Yeah, as long as you set it to be, compatible between the two of them, it works fine.
Mm-hmm.
But the AES stuff has a lot more flexibility, so you have to make sure that it's expecting the right thing.
Right. Yeah. Or else you're gonna have what we call jitter.
Yeah.
which is no fun.
Terrible sounding stuff.
It's basically audio interfaces having far too much coffee. That's basically what it, well, no, not exactly, but yeah, it's word clock issues. Anyway, that's gonna be neat, man. I was gonna say while you were talking about that, we need like a nerd alert sound effect because I was loving every second of it.
So, just to clarify a little bit for you guys out there, we're working on upgrading the studio here so that everything is video capable. And one of the things that we need to do for that is change it so that we have more than one Skype call-in point. And I bought 2 little mini ITX computers that have HDMI outputs, and each one of those will be basically a Skype phone with video. And the audio out of those boxes gets piped over to the mixer, and we'll talk about that after we're done discussing Alex's thing. But the video out of them also goes into that live video switcher, so that we can do things like record the podcast live to H.264 video encoding, and you'll be able to see Shane through the internets, and you'll be able to see the live view out of the studio, and a bunch of other stuff we can do, like showing you this desktops and what's going on the computers and stuff like that. So it'll all be pretty cool.
So, dude, the reason I got into audio podcasting is just the same as, why radio guys are on the radio. I'm just joking.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not a Garrison Keillor, Shane.
No, this is true. Yeah. I'm going to mention, so that was a weird little hiccup right there. Did you notice that?
No.
No, okay. What I was going to mention, as far as the studio rewire is concerned, you really need to do a diagram flowchart
I've
situation
got
for
one.
all the nerds. Okay, because we're all gonna be loving that kind of stuff. I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so getting on to the interface, this guy's plans for an interface and his microphone idea.
Yeah, components wise, he does electrical engineering for a living, so he's kind of obsessive about noise floor being as low as
Mhm,
possible. And
mhm.
I've explained to him a couple times that sometimes you want color and you want
Yeah, I
that
was
kind
gonna
of
say
thing.
there's obviously there's two different versions of that, right? You want the cleanest interface possible, and sometimes you want a clean preamp, and sometimes you want something that's going to color it to some degree. But it's always nice to have the clean interface, and then color it if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
But that's sort of what I think. There's not really any I don't think there's any colored interfaces out there on purpose other than sort of like mic preamp emulators and these
Yeah.
types of things. Um, so yeah, no, yeah, I think as far as that end's concerned, I'm sure he's got it sort of figured out. But getting to the miking idea, and I can't remember how he put it, but um,
Oh, his array
yeah,
of
right.
microphones. You're getting into some pretty highly technical scientific stuff there,
Right. And yeah, he's gonna need some serious. I was gonna say he's gonna need some serious formulas.
which
I
he
understand
actually
the.
has already.
Okay, yeah, because he was gonna say I understand the. I'm not sure about the entire practical applications for everything. If the formula is correct, it could work, but it's gonna still come down to miking technique in the first place. Um, but yeah, I can see it working if you were, especially if you were doing 5.1 or something. you know. But like you were mentioning in the interview, it may come down to it being built for a specific room,
Yeah,
much like sort of the bullet time, um, you know,
exactly. Yeah.
room. Um, that I guess that would
The
I
reason
think
why I
that would
asked
be
him
the
that
best way to do it.
question while I had him on the line there was that it seems to me like for sort of hobbyist goofing off sort of thing or a live sort of thing, this wouldn't be useful at all. But for building a room to do a specific task, it could be potentially really cool.
Yeah, well, I think it could be super genius for doing video game stuff or 5.1 stuff or um, if you like live, not live theater, but if you were like pre-recording sort of like a radio drama, um,
I
you could have
want to
space,
do that someday.
yeah, like a spatial kind of thing that's happening depending on where you put the microphones, right? Uh,
A radio drama. I don't care if we use Alex's technology to do it. I just want to have like some dudes and chicks standing around in 1940s, and they have to be in black and white,
yeah,
and it needs to be sort of film noir lighted, and they need to talk like it was a dark and stormy night.
yeah, exactly. We're gonna play LA Noir first, and then come up with some ideas. I was gonna mention too, when they used to do those things, we need to get a big slab of beef and mic it. So anytime there's a punch, we have one guy who just stands there and punches the beef, and then you get a nice big slab.
Yeah, Foley artist.
Yeah, exactly. That would be entertaining,
They
but it would
actually have a
also.
live Foley artist on Prairie Home Companion, which
Oh, do
has
they?
come up on the show a few times.
See, yeah, doing a radio show like that, I mean, it's the same as doing any other kind of production, really. I mean, you need to practice it, just like, if you're going to do a live musical, you need to have a tech day and you need to run through it a few times. And
Yeah,
obviously, the
being
people
a
need to
live
know how to.
sound geek, I tell you what, those old school live radio shows, those are like the pinnacle.
Oh,
That's
I
epic.
agree. The thing is, though, and you have to remember too, back then, a lot of the times those consoles didn't have mutes. They were just
Yeah,
a fader, and they definitely didn't have no noise gates. So, so you really had to be on the ball. Like sometimes I'm watching live TV in the morning, like there's this breakfast show that's on, and not so much with the video, but sometimes the sound guy forgets to turn somebody's mic on. And of course, it's early in the morning, but with automation and that kind of stuff, like you can almost plan it so that you never really have to touch anything; that it will sort of pre-figure it out for you. Um, but yeah, I mean, back then it's like I always harken back to the it's not so much the Beatles as like the old way of recording stuff with 4 tracks or 8 tracks or whatever, um, and just having to know how to actually engineer, not just like recording something and then sorting it out afterwards like we all sort of tend to do.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
you know,
having
and
good talent helps too.
yeah, having
Back
great.
then the talent was so much better at knowing, what they could and couldn't do.
Well, and it was what happened was
It's not like working with
stuff
Shane,
filtered.
who knows better, but still does stuff like, um, open the beer next to the mic.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you cut that out?
No.
Okay, well, good. I'm Canadian. I have to live up to my standard.
Yeah.
At least I haven't got a ring of Kubasol out yet. But anyway, so moving on, we were talking about DIY stuff. So previously, we had sort of briefly discussed the idea of making your own equipment, and I know you've done some synthesizers and stuff. Have you ever done any like audio processing gear?
One of the projects I have going on right now is not necessarily processing, but a conversion box. And it's for the whole studio rewire that I was talking about, because we're using multiple machines to take the Skype calls into the mixer in the future version of the studio. We're gonna have to use the onboard sound cards of those machines to generate the actual audio from the Skype call into something that we can get into the mixer. And I've been stuck using the line out on a Mac to do that at the moment, and it causes all sorts of bad artifacts to show up. And you'll hear it sometimes on Shane's side of things. You'll hear a very high-pitched whining. I do my best to take it out in post, but I can't cut the high offs too much, otherwise he starts, sounding like muffled.
Sounding like this.
Yes, like field effect. So to solve that problem, what I'm going to do is use the optical SPDIF out on these boxes and feed a little tiny converter box that changes it from optical toslink to a pair of RCA analog outputs. Now, I don't want to run RCA consumer grade cables between the mixer and these little converter boxes. So instead, I'm going to put them in a shielded box with a built-in power supply to run all of them, and rewire the RCA outputs up to 1/4-inch jacks, and put the whole thing in a rack mount case so that I can bolt it into the rack, and then run the optical links between the computers and the converter box, which will get rid of all of the noise from the PCIe bus and USB bus and all that, and then do the conversion outboard and convert it to analog and put it into the big mixer.
The big mixer would be the tone port, right?
Yeah, I think the tone
Yeah.
port is going to be handling the input side of things, and the Firefly 808 will be doing
Yep.
the conversion for the live encoder.
So yeah, like it's the tape return basically on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It won't even need to be hooked to a computer.
Right. Yeah. Well, you could technically just mix it on there and go live to. You don't need to. Technically speaking, you don't need to record in GarageBand, but
No,
we could just,
we won't be.
Yeah.
We will be going live to video, live
Right.
to H.264, which means that
Right.
I need to get a multi-channel expander, limiter, compressor in here.
So I was gonna. You may not need an input. What you really need is just a console. Actually, I don't know if you so much need the DAs, like the 2 DAs, because one, you're gonna go into the tone port, out of the tone port, into the other DA box, and
Well,
then
we'll
we're getting
see.
it with some paper.
I would ideally I would like to have a console that has more channels and has
Mm,
better, like pans on it.
mhm.
That's why
Yeah,
I need to use the tone port because my 808 doesn't have any pans. So
right.
I can only ever use 4 channels at a time on that thing unless I'm doing 2 things at the same time because the outputs they get mixed down to left and right on channels, 1, 3,
Uh-huh.
5,
Yeah,
7 get mixed to left,
and
right?
the butt.
It's just stupid.
The way that's a Motu box.
It's Firefly.
Right,
I forget the company. But yeah, it's the one that I had to buy when my tone port blew up randomly.
right,
And
right.
then I sent my tone port over to one of the engineers who happens to be a guy that listens to the podcasts and the shows that we produce. He was one of their lead engineers, and he said he could, fix it for me. And I was like, "Hey, that's cool." So I mailed it
You know,
to him, and he did.
I'm almost thinking that to if you're gonna go live to video anyway, I'm thinking take the DA, like the audio boxes out of the equation and just get a console sort of thing happening, because
I would love to, but that would require
it
uh,
just
a
I'm thinking
lot of
about the
cash, and the video switching stuff is going to cost a small fortune, so I'm not going to be able to afford it.
no, that's cool. Just what I was kind of thinking was there might be a bit of a latency from when everything gets fed to when you're finally hearing it, kind of. Me and you are going to have to talk about this a little bit more, but I actually have plans for a, I think, 8-channel mono mixer that you can build. That might be the bee's knees, actually.
That might be pretty cool. I mean, I wouldn't mind doing something like that, but getting this studio switched over to all DIY gear as much as possible would be a lovely challenge.
Yeah, exactly. Or I mean, I think your plan right now is probably going to be perfect for what you want to do right now. But
Yeah.
I think in the future that might be kind of a cool thing anyway. The mixer that I was talking about isn't a fantastically exciting one as far as pans and stuff like that is concerned. But I mean, we're just basically
Well,
talking.
if it's all in mono, then it doesn't matter if it's got
It's
pans or
it's
not,
a
right?
it's basically a mono mixer with a mono out, so it sums it to mono and then gives you one mono mix.
One of the
Uh,
other reasons
but
why I
yeah.
do need to use the tone port for this is
Mm,
because of the matrix routing that it can do. Because we're not just dealing with mixing down the 2 Skype calls down to a stereo signal that I can feed the digital input on the video encoder. We're
mhm,
talking about taking live Skype calls in,
mhm.
feeding them to that, but also feeding them to the live monitors here in the studio, our headphones.
Yeah,
Also, doing the preamp on the mics in the studio and feeding those signals to the live video encoder and feeding them back out to both of those Skype calls so that the remote callers can hear us in the studio. But then it gets complicated because the Skype guy on line 1 needs to be heard by the Skype guy on line 2, but not by himself. And the Skype
mm.
guy on line 2 needs to be heard by the guy on line 1, but not by himself.
Well, technically speaking, he can hear himself. Like, I
Well,
mean,
no,
in the
because it
studio,
causes a latency echo when you do it that way. So
right?
you actually have to not send them their own audio back. You have to very carefully route all of this stuff when you're dealing with Skype. It's kind of annoying, but yeah,
Mhm.
we've done a lot of testing with this particular thing, and we found out that if you just use a matrix router to only send the things to the people that they absolutely need to send, then everything is
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do the same thing like on my Pro Tools box as far as like, because I got 8 analog outs, so as far as headphone mixes are concerned, I can just same idea, send the drummer everything except for the drums, send everybody else everything, and a little less of them and more of the drums.
Yeah. It's kind of like doing monitor mixes for everybody. It's the
Right,
same
yeah,
basic
auxiliary.
principle. But the technology that we have to be able to do the monitor mixing here is the tone port. So that's our
No,
input
and makes sense.
side, and it doesn't need to be. It's basically just acting as a matrix router. It really is.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I can hear you perfectly, so it's it's totally cool. Yeah, I'm just as you were saying, like mentioning all the things that you needed to do. I'm like, the console will do all of those things. We need to find you, beg, borrow, or steal a Mackie console for you.
Yeah, I would love to have a console in here. That would make my life a million times easier.
Yeah.
I'm used to having one from
So you
doing
get a ground.
live sound back in the day, having the ability to do all of that with just a couple of pushes of some buttons and some faders. And yeah, that would be nice. But this is what I have to work with. So yeah.
No, and it's doing the job. Listen, I think we're almost out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, we're at 31. I doubt anyone will mind that we went over a minute.
It's all good. Cool. Okay.
So, a couple of things here today. Shane is trying out a new input system for his voice. Let us know if it sounds better. I know his volume dropped out a couple of times during that, but that's just Skype's compression being weird. We'll work that out. But let us know how it turned out. And if you wanted to find out more about Alex's project, we talked about it a couple weeks ago on Zombie Tech TV in a lot more detail. And so that'll be up. I think it's like episode 63 or something like that. Yeah, I think that's it. So thank you for listening, everyone. If you have your own DIY audio gear projects,
we want to
totally contact us. And if it's cool, then maybe we'll get you on to sort of explain what you're up to, and we can talk about it. So that's it for us for now. You guys can find the show every Friday at patchbay.tv. There's an RSS link there if you want to have it automatically downloaded to your phone, your iTunes, whatever, or you can just listen to it on the page. Yeah, that's it for us. We're done. We'll see you guys next week.